Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Today, your fireside chat host is Mike Jauquet, and he is here with our guest JB Onofré of the Apache Foundation. Together, they'll be discussing Apache ActiveMQ, Artemis, and Camel, the roadmap to cloud-native resilience, modern security, and next-gen management. Before we start, I have some quick housekeeping items I'd like to mention regarding today's session. First, this session will last approximately 30 minutes with a quick Q&A session at the end. It is being recorded, and we will share a link to the recording in the next few days. If you do have any questions, please add them to the Q&A section in the Q&A box to the right of your screen. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate you. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, just like Jen said. And I want to say thank you so much for your time today, everyone, and for joining us. My name is Michael Jauquet. I am the Director of Demand Generation and Business Development here at Apache IQ. We are incredibly excited to dig into what's new with Apache ActiveMQ, Artemis, and Camel, and to better understand how their evolution is accelerating to address the critical needs of modern cloud deployments, high availability, simplified operations, and robust security. And I'm also incredibly grateful and excited to introduce my friend and fellow panelist, JB Onofré. JB, would you like to give a brief introduction before we jump into the session here?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm JB, director of the Apache Software Foundation. I'm a member on the foundation for more than 20 years now. I'm working on several Apache projects, obviously, like ActiveMQ, Camel, Artemis, but also more in the big data space, like Apache Polaris, Apache Iceberg. So yeah, I'm happy to have a chat with you today about what's the community is thinking about the future and roadmap on ActiveMQ, especially and Camel. Yeah.
I love it. The community, the foundation, and we are very lucky to have you with us. I wanted to give you a big shout out and congratulations. You recently joined our board of directors. So I know that most feel like I do. Anyone that has the pleasure of working with you is very lucky. So without any further ado, let's jump into some questions today. I know we have a lot to cover in 30 minutes, but I think I want to start with architectural evolution and clustering. Specifically, CajaDB, it's a key component for storage in Apache ActiveMQ. Do you see a potential evolution for CajaDB?
Yeah, but you're right, Mike. Actually, CajaDB is a critical piece in ActiveMQ when you are running your broker. By default, it's basically storing a lot of details and persistent messaging inside the storage. That's not the only option. You can also use a JDBC backend, but that's the preferred one for ActiveMQ. I see two potential evolutions on CajaDB. The first evolution is a natural one because in ActiveMQ right now, we are working to support the latest version of the messaging specification, JMS. And there are new changes and new updates we have to do on the broker that should be reflected into CajaDB because, when you're adding, for instance, durable subscribers, which is a new feature from Jakarta Messaging 3, then we have to persist that because if you switch from one broker to another, it means that this information has to be available. So we need first to update CajaDB to be able to store this additional information we need. So that's the first evolution. I think it's a required one and it's a natural one. The second evolution is more from an architectural standpoint. Today, CajaDB is only able to deal with a single broker. So basically, when you start a broker, you're going to start CajaDB and it's going to be used only by this broker, which is great by default, but it has two limitations. The first limitation is basically when you want to create high availability instances of ActiveMQ, then you need to share the same storage for the two CajaDB instances. So basically, it means that you have to use NFS or any kind of share storage to implement that, which is not always super easy, especially in a cloud kind of environment. That's the first limitation. The second limitation is in ActiveMQ, we can basically spread the load of messages across different set of brokers. That's what we name network of brokers. And we do that using a network connector. So basically, one broker can dispatch and forward messages to another broker. And there, it means that basically, if you lose one of a broker in this cluster, you're going to lose all the messages on this broker waiting to be restarted. And so I think it's where we can think about a new way to implement KDB. And the idea that I'm discussing with the community right now is why not having some kind of replicated KDB. And by replicated KDB, it means that two KDB instances can talk each other, and then one can be a replica of the main one. And so if we have one broker falls down for any reason, then another one can have a replication of the first one. So that's it's not a trivial things to do, to be honest. But I think it's more than welcome, and that's something we are discussing with the community. How we have different experiments ongoing on that, like should we use Apache Bookkeeper? Maybe, I don't know. For me, that could be a solution. But also Artemis did a huge work on this part. Like they introduced the new mirroring feature in the latest version of Artemis, and also you have the acceptor log distributed log system. That's also pretty interesting. So thanks to the work between all the communities, we can find something which is pretty solid and very interesting for the infra and the future of KDB.
Love it. It sounds like the goal is really just to highlight that reduction of infrastructure complexity overall.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, the complexity is on us inside Artemis ActiveMQ, but for the users, it should be straightforward.
Seamless. Yes. Yeah. But it makes me thinking long term and ActiveMQ 7, do you see potential big changes from an architectural standpoint? So what would you say are the main differences between ActiveMQ 6 and ActiveMQ 7?
Yeah. Without knowing exactly when ActiveMQ 7 could happen, for sure. But the big changes that personally I would love to see is today ActiveMQ, since the beginning of ActiveMQ is a big Spring application, basically. We have a bunch of Spring framework beans. And basically, if you take a look on the main configuration file, which is ActiveMQ XML, it's basically just a lot of beans we are defining, which is fine. But I think we can do there are two comments. I don't want to say issues, but two comments about that. First, Spring framework is not an Apache project. It's an Apache license framework, but we don't know where Spring is going. And with a recent announcement about the maintenance of, CD on Spring and all this stuff, I'm a little bit concerned about the future of Spring for open source projects. And so regarding that, I would love to consider removing Spring as a core dependency in ActiveMQ. And maybe so it means that maybe leveraging another framework like CDI provided, like I don't know, Quarkus or something internal we can do. So I would say that the first big change in the architecture internally to the broker is probably removing Spring from the picture. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, that's true, ActiveMQ, it's today a little like a big monolith. Basically, you have all the transport connectors extra. It's pretty convenient for a broker, in my opinion, from a user standpoint, because you just get the Docker image of a broker, you have everything you need, and you just run like this. But in terms of maintenance, there are some challenges. So I think that by using a new framework like CDI powered open framework, we can have something more modular, where we can update part of one transport connector without impacting the rest of the broker. So that's the kind of changing a little the internals to facilitate our life of us as contributors. But so that's the two big changes I expect for ActiveMQ 7. That would be remove a Spring dependency and something more light and modular, facilitating the maintenance.
Right. Removing those dependencies and moving frameworks, that is, it sounds like the goal there is to define a major version shift and introducing new core capabilities. It's very interesting. And, I'd like to move on to security and compliance because I have some questions. Currently ActiveMQ security is powered by JAS and authorization plugins. What are the new features coming around security for ActiveMQ?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think there are a lot of expectations on this front. The first thing is, you're right. I think ActiveMQ is really based on JAS, the Java Authentication and Authorization Service. And we provide a lot of login modules. So you can use a user property file, you can use an held up or Active Directory as a backend. But we need more additional login modules to be able to integrate into the modern architecture that exists in the organizations. I'm thinking, for instance, Hot 2. And we have a PR right now about adding a new login module, adding the Hot 2 support, which is great. I did that, but but that's great anyway. And also, I'm thinking about new integration layer like OPA, Open Profile Agent. So instead of storing everything into ActiveMQ by itself, we should be able to use identity providers that exist in the organizations, but also OPA, agent, and all this stuff. So my focus on this front is really facilitate the integration of ActiveMQ in modern security infrastructure that exists into the organizations.
Sounds like we're trying to emphasize that modernization of authenticity protocols or authentication protocols. But for organizations in highly regulated industries, finance, healthcare come to mind right away. How do these new security features simplify that path to meeting stringent audit and governance requirements?
Yeah, that's. I think it's the extension of what we talked before. I mean, by being able to integrate into the existing security resources from the organization, then they can leverage all that exists today in ActiveMQ. Also, I think that a critical piece in this in this kind of regulated environment. I'm in Europe, so I know how regulated it could be. It's all about auditing. Like you need to know everything that happened into the broker, because and it has to be, stored somewhere, because maybe by regulation you may be asked, "Hey, what happened a couple of months ago on this queue in this broker?" for regulation purposes. So I think that integration into the security infra is one thing, it's key, but also considering additional plugins. So I don't think we need to have that by default in ActiveMQ, but at least provide auditing features, extend plugins to provide additional. I mean, we have, for instance, we have one plugin which is named the Logger Broker plugin. So basically, you can log a lot of activities that happen into your broker, including advisory topics and stuff like that. So that exists. I think it's also an effort about documenting and how we match with what it's expecting from a regulation standpoint.
Yeah. The goal is to connect technical security updates to business compliance value.
Yeah.
Love it.
Agree.
Love it. For operational excellence, though, what's your take on ActiveMQ web console? Can you see any evolutions there?
I'm gonna be pretty transparent about that. I don't like the web console. I don't like the web console for two reasons. First, because if you take a look about the majority of security issues we got recently on ActiveMQ, I would say 90% are coming from the web console. So, and also is a pretty old web console. So it doesn't look super modern. It's pretty limited. we'd never recommend to use it in production, to be honest. So I don't like it. I mean, the only huge benefit of the web console, it's only it exists. That's it. That's it. So it's pretty convenient to use it. But I think that we need something new. And I think Artemis on this front, they did a great move. On Artemis, they provide an Artemis console, which is way more modern and providing a lot of interesting features. So my take on the web console is pretty clear. Personally, I would love to remove a web console from ActiveMQ. Period. Now the question is, what do we provide to our users? I think that we already integrate Jauquet, so we can use Jauquet as a kind of backbone to a new web console. So why not creating a new web console using React or something like that? I started a prototype around that. It's pretty interesting. Does it make sense for our users compared to external web console that exist and that way more powerful than what we can provide? I'm thinking obviously about Mesh IQ as a platform. So I honestly, I would say that short term, I would love to remove a web console if the community is okay with that, and maybe provide a light alternative to that, and maybe just rely on external web console that exists like Hot.io or Mesh IQ or others.
Yeah. It's, I mean, that focus on modernization, it's to provide simplified governance and developer experience, self-serve developer experience. Interesting. So for open telemetry, though, it's becoming the industry standard for observability. How does the deep integration of open telemetry in this roadmap help teams eliminate that visibility vacuum in complex hybrid cloud message flows?
That's a great question. And actually, you are spot on something that we should consider and we should do. Historically, on ActiveMQ, and that's also the same for Karaf and Camel, we mostly focus on about JMX. So basically, we say, hey, we expose everything like metrics, attributes, everything through JMX, and it's up to you to get and consume the matrix you want, the attributes you want, you store wherever you want, but it's up to you. And for instance, we have an Apache product to do like a Karaf decanter. So Karaf decanter, the idea is really putting JMX metrics, log files, stuff like that, and store into Elasticsearch, Cassandra, whatever. I think it was nice like 10 years ago or 5 years ago maximum, but it's not what we are looking for today. We are looking for more modern kind of exporter that can basically have more detailed events and spans inside the broker that we can export to external system like Prometheus or Zipkin, whatever. And then the big advantage of doing that is we have some kind of details as we have on JMX, but we also add all about the tracking. We're able to know that we can correlate, hey, this event is coming from ActiveMQ, it goes into these common routes using breadcrumb IDs, stuff like that, and it goes to another Artemis broker. And we on Prometheus or Zipkin, we would be able to see, hey, this is all the states of these events. And that will give more point to end-to-end, I would say, tracking about what's happening and the time we spend on different thread on the microservices application and stuff like that. So I think that I don't think we should remove JNX, honestly, because JNX is there and it's great and we can still use it. But adding some open telemetry features like spanning, that's pretty interesting. We already have a GitHub issue about that, so we know we have to do that. The question is, how to do that in a kind of meaningful way, like providing the accurate span for our users. So, but totally agree with you. That's a great feature, and we have to do that for sure.
But it's all about discussing tracing and monitoring across distributed systems. So,
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So for cloud native strategy though, what are your ideas or what are the ideas about ActiveMQ on the cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question because sometimes there are confusion about where we position ActiveMQ or Camel or whatever in this scope. The first thing to remember is we already have some managed services for ActiveMQ. So, for instance, if you go on AWS, you can find Amazon MQ, and Amazon MQ is a managed service for ActiveMQ. So the question is, you basically, as a user, I have two choices. My first choice is I can use existing managed service that provide ActiveMQ for me. Could be Amazon MQ, or I think even also they are doing something similar. Or I have a Kubernetes cluster on EKS, AKS, whatever, or maybe on a private cloud, and I would like to deploy ActiveMQ there. So today, the only thing that we provide in ActiveMQ is the Docker images. That's great, but that's not enough. So the things we are working on, and the Amazon MQ team is interesting to contribute that, is basically first we can provide M charts to simplify the deployment of ActiveMQ brokers on your infra. And something that I have in mind is also why not having a Kubernetes operator that can automatically create new brokers for you, adding in the same stateful set as you have already, creating new Kubernetes services, stuff like that. So I think that on our road to the cloud, I would say there are two features we should add. Hand chart, that's going to happen pretty soon. I think that the M chart is going to be available, maybe not in the next ActiveMQ release, but the next one. But I would also consider the Kubernetes operator as a welcome feature we should consider.
Interesting. It sounds like there is a big push to identify those cloud native differentiators. Um,
Exactly.
interesting. Love it, JB. So as Apache Camel though continues to evolve alongside ActiveMQ and Artemis, um, how does the roadmap there ensure that these technologies work, in concert to simplify the modernization journey most companies are moving towards and away from these legacy monoliths?
Yeah, great question. I think you mentioned the usual suspects, ActiveMQ, Artemis, Karaf, Camel, that's all the same, the same guys, I would say, in the rooms. The good thing is the majority of the communities around those projects, they are across several projects. For instance, I'm on Karaf, on Camel, on ActiveMQ, on Artemis. A lot of people from Camel are also on ActiveMQ and Artemis. So thanks to that, we can discuss all together and say, hey, we planned this new feature. What do you think? And how we can leverage that? So the relationship between the communities are really great on this regard. Now where we are going, I think that, and that's also my role as an Apache member and director of foundation, is to fill the gap between the different projects. And for me, you're right. It looks like we are coming from the legacy kind of thing, like, hey, it's a messaging platform. There are new things that happen. And it's where I think that I don't consider really as a legacy. I think that it's different use cases. Like people comparing Kafka and ActiveMQ, I think it's not fair and it's not right because they are two great projects just addressing two very different use cases. If you want to implement transaction and very have a rock solid transaction, probably messaging and ActiveMQ is way better than Kafka. If you want to have huge throughput, a lot of log record, you want to consume big data streaming, Kafka is probably better for sure. So now the question is, okay, I have ActiveMQ, which is my transaction system. I have Kafka, which is mostly my data system. And at the end of the day, I want to do analytics on everything. So why not bringing the gap between messaging and streaming and analytics? So basically analytics means lakehouse. And by lakehouse, it means that we can get the data from using Camel from Kafka and or ActiveMQ and store into Iceberg using Polaris as a catalog, but store into Iceberg. And then you can query your data using that. That's basically some observability platforms. They are doing that now. If you take a look about a company like Datadog, they are using Iceberg to store everything and they can do a query. So I think that by adding new connectors, and we have a bunch of projects at the Apache Foundation, like Apache NiFi, Apache Hop. I mean, there are a lot of, framework and project we can leverage to create a kind of big backbone that fill the gap between transaction, streaming, and data. And that's where I'm super excited with, because I think we have a lot of opportunity to, create the kind of assembly between all these different Lego boxes, I would say.
Definitely, it's the goal. The ultimate goal is to address the entire integration ecosystem and that transition to modern stacks. Very interesting. Well, I appreciate it. This is the beauty of community, being able to chat with you, JB, today. But I want to open it up to the community that joined us today to see if there's any questions. We have about 4 minutes before we have to wrap. But I wanted to see if there are any questions in the chat. Jen, I know you've been keeping track here, monitoring the chat. Has anybody asked anything compelling that you feel like would that JB will be able to answer?
Sure thing. Thanks so much, and great session. We did have 2 roll in, and hopefully we can get to both of them because I know you're on a tight schedule, JB. So the first one came in from Timo. Can our Caja DB easily replace shared storage to simplify our infrastructure?
Oh, that's a great question. I think so. I mean, that's exactly the idea. Today, Mike had great question about, hey, how we are going to cloud and how we can leverage the cloud ecosystem and all this stuff. When we talk about storage and file system on the cloud is never easy. I mean, how do you duplicate that? How you replicate that? So if in replicated CarDB, exactly like we do in Artemis with the mirroring feature, we can remove this coupling to the file system. I think that for the cloud infrastructure is very welcome. So yeah, I don't know exactly how we're going to do that, but clearly in the roadmap, that's an important piece in the roadmap for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And the next question comes in from Oscar. How will OpenTelemetry span help us track transactions moving between legacy and cloud native systems?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's something we touched with Mike also during this session. It's where we have to be very careful in terms of the span we're going to create in the broker, because that's going to be the responsibility of a broker to export the span that could be exported to Prometheus or whatever. And here we have to include the meaningful information that helps the users then to attach, hey, this span coming from ActiveMQ, I can correlate with my process in my macro service, for instance. And it's where we have to, sometimes, just creating span easily, that doesn't help much. So we have to be very careful in terms of what information we want to include in the span exported by ActiveMQ, and then how we can attach this span to another span to have a tracking. So from my standpoint, from a user standpoint, it should be super easy. So we have to evaluate all the details we want to include into the span and how it's going to help the users. But that's a fair request. Like, hey, I want to track the transaction end to end, and how can I do that?
Okay, great. Thank you so much, JB. I'll end the questions there and hand it back to you, Mike.
Appreciate it, Jen. Thank you so much. And thank you, JB. And to everybody that watched, that joined our session, couldn't thank you enough. So we'll make this available for anybody who wants to watch it again. But this, again, is the beauty of community, bringing people together, answering questions, having discussions. So looking forward to our next chance to do this, JB. And I appreciate everybody. Let's stay in touch and talk soon. Cheers, everyone. Thank you for joining.